Alright then, now for a bit of extra fun with animation. We're actually using simulation with animation in order to do some modeling. Complex, but just take a look at this lovely tablecloth I made over this table. Ooh, it's so complicated and organic and clothy and wavy. This, you might think, took a lot of modeling, but actually what I did was I kind of cheated, which is okay in this class, everything's fake anyway. What I did was I simulated this cloth falling on the table, so you'll notice I'm halfway through the animation. Let me go back and then hit play, and I'll show you. There it is. The cloth was just sitting there, and then it fell. And I can actually go back, and as I simulate this, watch, there's a little orange line at the bottom of my timeline. If I change where this thing is, pardon my phone going off right there, and maybe just, change its angle, it's just simulating basic gravity. It's going to fall, and if I let it go for a second, you'll see it's starting to calculate it. This orange bar is basically the buffer for the simulation. It's calculated 90 frames, 100 frames, 120, etc., etc. If I press play now, it'll play up until it's calculated. So there we go. And bye, tablecloth. That'll just fall infinitely. So, how do you make an object like this? It's pretty simple. Let's make a new scene. Don't save my changes. I need two things. I need a table and a cloth. We've just got a thing that our cloth is going to hit. So there's my table, and let's go ahead and just make a simple plane as my cloth. Now because this thing is going to bend a lot, I want lots and lots of polygons. Remember, each polygon, each face, is just going to be flat no matter what. So I need lots and lots of little ones in order to make it bend. So I'm going to go to its inputs, polyplane, just crank up the subdivisions to something really intense. Now, what I want to do, I notice I already did it, but over here under modeling, you want to change from modeling to FX. And I got some new buttons up here, and under nCloth, you have two buttons. Click on your tablecloth, the thing that's going to fall, and I go to nCloth and say create nCloth. Now it's created two things in the world: a nucleus, which is where all my physics is calculated. You'll see gravity, for example, 9.8. If you ever taken an astronomy course or science course, 9.8 meters per second squared is the acceleration rate of gravity on Earth. And they've got gravity direction, y -1, so things fall down. You can come in here and mess with anything you want, including my limit to wind speed and wind direction. I might mess with those a little on. But I also need something for this to fall onto. Right now, sorry, nCloth, the other object, it's calculating this. If I press play right now, it's just going to fall. Very simple. It needs something to actually hit to change. So I need to click on this, nCloth, and go to create passive collider. Really, in nCloth, you only need the first two buttons for what we're doing. Very basic stuff. And now it's calculating, 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 calculating. Let's hit play and see what we got. We've got the cloth falling on the cube. And what I can do when I'm done with this is click on this, and there are various ways to stop it from simulating anymore. If I just want this to be done, if I want to model a tent or a shirt or something like that, I could drop it, find a nice frame, some place I like it. I like the way it's shaped right there. You could delete its history, or even better yet, just make a duplicate of it. The duplicate will have none of the history. It is going to be totally just a boring old piece of geometry that you can then do whatever you want to with our regular modeling tools. Don't know why I had my tablecloth explode, but you get the idea. Plus, you can keep the original one in your scene. Now there's two more things to note about the nCloth. One is how we affect how it bends, and the other is to note that we can pin it to things so it doesn't fall off. Because if I take my cloth right here and I want Supercube, the cube was here to fight for justice in the American way. Oh, Supercube's cape just fell off. But first, let's talk about its attributes. So, if I click on my nCloth and go to my attribute editor, I'm looking for the cloth shape, and what I want to look for is dynamic properties. There are only 200 billion of them, but you can get a rough idea what you're looking for just by reading about it. It's got stretch resistance, compression, bend resistance. If I give it a ton of bend resistance, it's gonna, you'll note it has to spend a bit more time calculating, and it's gonna be less like cloth and more like, well, you decide. Is that sheet metal? Is it a sheet of plastic? It doesn't want to bend much at all. So crazy bend resistance leads to a much less clothy object. Stretch resistance, a classic little bit of joke, is just to take that down to 0 and then zoom out. It can never stop stretching. So it's just going to keep on falling forever. There is no limit to how far it can stretch. I think we should take that bend resistance back down a bit. But some stretch resistance makes it a real thing. You can also just say that its rigidity is 100% and then dunk. Yep, it's just a solid piece of stuff. While I'm at it, it's worth noting that I've made a plane here, but anything can be an nCloth. So if I just want a very cheap bouncy ball simulation, there's a ball. I can just say, congratulations, you're an nCloth with a rigidity of maximum. And you know what? Let's add a floor. Create passive collider. Alright, so now I've got the simulation that I will not accept for your 3 bouncing balls assignment. Just simulating it. Doink, doink, doink. And I frankly think it's malfunctioning a bit here. I don't think this should just be rolling over nothing. What if I put you over there? Would you be better over there? I think it's a little broken. It's also starting to break against the ground, but maybe you're the problem. You can take any object and treat it as an nCloth. You can simulate all sorts of weird stuff, like, let's say, a very, very, very deflated basketball. Oof. That thing is sad. Now it's a bowl. I've made a bowl. So, let's turn my plane back on. This right here, dynamic properties. You can have all sorts of fun. I'll let you mess around with this. We're not going to get too specific about it. But one thing I do want to show with a, oops, let's go back to the beginning. Pretty normal bit of cloth is how to stop this from falling. So let's take bend resistance down. Now I'm going to put it on the edge of this. Now what I want is basically to imagine imaginary stitches that are going to connect this to the cube. I'm going to have it hover a little higher than the cube, just to be clear. But what I can do is go to Vertex and take a bunch of vertices on the edge right here that would basically, if I stitch this to the cube, I'd use these. Then I hold down Shift and select a cube. So I've got a bunch of vertices here, and the thing I want to stick it to, and you go into N constraint and find point to surface. And I see it's made all these little stitches. And it's recalculating. So now if I press play, my cloth will not leave the object. But if I wish, I can also take my passive collider and animate it. Let's see how that looks once it actually simulates. There it goes, taking the cloth along with it. So, if you really want to get into flags, tents, maybe some clothing, capes for objects, and even characters, nCloth is the way to go about it.